This time on Militaria at the museum, we'll view a charcoal drawing that was sketched by an official naval war artist during World War II. Then, we'll compare two wooden aircraft from the early days of aviation and discuss how changes in cockpit design over time improved flight. Finally, we'll look at a century-old British revolver that belonged to a tribe in Pakistan years before being discovered in a gun shop. Beyond museum exhibits lies a hidden realm of archived artifacts that hold the keys to unlocking intriguing stories from the past. Come along as I meet with experts at the Army, Naval, and Aviation museums, where I've been granted special access to pull back the curtains and reveal the secrets of their militaria. My name is Sandy Hiltz, and all my life I've been captivated by military history. Now, I have the rare opportunity to explore a collection of fascinating military artifacts on Militaria at the museum. I'm at the Naval Museum with Lisa McNiven to look over a charcoal drawing by Canadian war artist and naval officer Leonard Brooks. Brooks was one of 8 official naval artists commissioned during World War II. He often did rough charcoal sketches in the field that he then used as references for his paintings. Lisa, I understand you have here at the museum quite a good selection of art that was commissioned by the Canadian government during the Second World War.
Yes, we have a wonderful collection of art by wartime artists, and one of our newest acquisitions is by an artist called Leonard Brooks.
Really? Could we take a look at that?
Absolutely. It's just in here in the Labrador room.
Lisa, looking at this drawing, it's not the more frequent depiction of the wartime that was done by artists. It's not some great bloody battle. It's really quite a calm scene. You have people reclining on the decks, and it looks like perhaps polishing the periscope or something. People sort of lounging around the deck of the submarine. Is that something that's common throughout Brooks's art?
I would say so. This is actually called Submarine Siesta, and it was commissioned for the wartime RCN publication Crow's Nest. And his focus seemed to be more on the mundane, the day-to-day activities that the sailors had to perform as part of their duties.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. So he's capturing sort of the more relaxed, if one could say, times aboard submarines and ships and so on.
Leonard Brooks's drawings are considered significant because it also portrays the mundane and the day in, day out routine of a sailor in the Canadian Navy, RCN, RCNVR. War was not simply of danger and battle, it was also the day-to-day routine of everything from taking care of decks to peeling potatoes. One of his most famous paintings is entitled The Potato Peelers, and it depicts 2 sailors sitting on the side of a dock simply peeling potatoes, but it also depicts the regular day in, day out routine of what an average sailor would have to endure during World War II, during their time of service.
What can you tell me about the artist?
The artist, his actual full name was Frank Leonard Brooks, and he was born in 1911 and died in 2011, just close to his 100th birthday. So he had a long and varied career as a well-respected and well-known artist. Leonard Brooks was born 1911 to 2011. He was actually a British citizen, but his family immigrated to Canada when he was a child, and he was greatly influenced by the art of the Group of 7, particularly Arthur Lismer. He answers the call for the RCNVR and enlists mid-war, and he draws mostly pen and ink and charcoal drawings of life of the RCNVR.
And so did he go on to have any formal art education?
He did, teaching at the North Toronto Collegiate School for about 6 years before he joins the RCNVR.
How did Brooks transition from that art into his naval career?
Well, in 1943, he joins the RCNVR as on his first rank is sub-lieutenant, and he's joining in the Special Services. It was created under the Department of National Defense, and it was a group of 32 wartime artists. War art was commissioned by the Canadian National Defense, and it was set for artists to interpret war, not simply through photography, but also through the classic art of drawing, painting, charcoal drawings, pastels, and pen and ink.
Really, that's interesting. So he's joined into sort of a special artists group within that.
Exactly. And I believe perhaps he felt a calling, how he could transfer his art into service.
Lisa, being as Brooks was working on behalf of the government, I would assume that this is one of many pictures that he did during the war, is it?
It is. It is part of the 113 drawings that he did as a wartime artist.
How did this work of Brooks come to be at the museum?
This work was discovered. One of our military offices was being decommissioned, and this was found in one of the rooms.
And does the museum hold many other of his works?
We have another one downstairs, and we have other wartime artists here in the museum. We have a Tony Law, we have Donald McKay also.
Lisa, what would you say was the overall impact of these pieces and this group on the war and on its story?
I think mid-war, this is 43 to 46, that they wanted a different interpretation of the war. And also photography could be held up because of censorship issues. So a wartime artist rendition would have been easier to publish.
More palatable,
Yes.
perhaps, to the forces that be. Lisa, with this program for the artists ending in 1946, did Brooks continue on with his career in the Navy?
No, in 1946, he returns to his job teaching in Toronto. But between teaching part-time and trying to sell his artwork, he wasn't making it financially. So he asks Veterans Affairs for a one-year grant to go to study in Mexico.
What happens? Does he return to Canada after that 1 year?
No, he stays in Mexico for the rest of his life.
Really?
Yes, he creates an artist colony in San Miguel.
Lisa, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to take a look at this drawing today. It's lovely that it's ended up here at the museum, particularly whereas it's amongst other works by some of the other noted war artists.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. We appreciate it every day. It's a beautiful scene to look at.
It certainly is. Up next after the break, I'll visit the Aviation Museum to learn about the advancement in cockpit design between two early aircraft. The Aviation Museum has two early wooden aircraft in its collection, the Silver Dart and the Lincoln Sport biplane. Mark People will showcase these two planes and explain how aviation technology, specifically cockpit design, evolved from one to the other.
The Silver Dart, being one of the first airplanes designed and built to fly, embodied various ideas at the time. The progression from those original aeronauts that were basically learning as they went and crashing as they went was to aircraft quite quickly.
Mark, I'm really excited to be here today talking about the Silver Dart replica that you have.
The Silver Dart is unique in a number of reasons because it had a number of innovations that were, at the time, were sort of groundbreaking.
The Silver Dart was the first aircraft to fly in Canada in February 1909 at Bedeck, Nova Scotia. The Silver Dart was an aircraft that was built by Glenn Curtiss in Hantsport, New York for Alexander Graham Bell, and it was part of the Aerial Experimental Association, a group founded by Bell to pursue heavier-than-air flight.
So Mark, when we talk about Bell, it's of course Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone. Do we know what led to his interest in flying?
The technology inspired him, and there had been experiments with kites early in 1903, 1904. And there was an understanding of flight was probably the next step. How do we do that?
Mark, when anyone thinks of the infancy of aviation, they of course, go straight to the Wright brothers. Can you tell us a little bit more about them and how their acts would compare to the Silver Dart?
The Wright brothers flew in December of 1903, but this flew in February of 1909.
What's changed in the cockpit in that time, and how does this compare to the cockpit of the Wright brothers plane?
Well, I guess the cockpit is kind of a loose term at this point. It's basically a rudimentary wooden seat, and we've got a wheel and we've got various controls attached to it, wires controlled to it. The Wright brothers had a different concept. They actually laid in a prone position and steered it that way. Shifting the controls by body weight is how they did it. What we see here is the evolution of the controls to a control wheel, so you can turn it and move your wings, and you can turn your rudder, you could move more movement into it, so that brings into that more control, theoretically.
So Mark, who was it that piloted that first flight of the Silver Dart? I can't imagine it was Graham Bell that was getting behind the controls himself.
J. McCurdy was an associate, and it was a member of the AEE. Bell liked to attract sort of young-minded people and saw talent, and he had been involved with it. And that's why McCurdy was thrown into the seat.
And it's sort of interesting, in selecting a pilot for this, you wouldn't have been really able to go and look for someone with any experience, because this is so early in the history of flight.
Exactly. They knew how it was going to go, but obviously it's a fine balancing act. And looking at the aircraft, you can see that, the rudimentary controls, there's a lot of exposure. There's a potential here to get some damage. The excitement would obviously come over you, but at the same time, there are some known risks.
Oh, absolutely. When we look at the Silver Dart, Mark, it's still very far off from what we would think of as a modern-day airplane. What's coming after this, and how are things starting to move more towards the planes that we're seeing, in the 1920s, First World War, that sort of era?
What happens in the technology, and particularly with the story of the aircraft, is that the technologies are all suddenly fueled by war. By 1914, the start of the First World War, all of a sudden, technology is being driven by the need to create a weapon, and that brings in a whole raft of changes. We're looking at an early 1930 Lincoln Sport biplane, which embodies all the technology improvements that we see from the First World War, and the big jump from the Silver Dart that we've just seen to this particular aircraft. A biplane is an aircraft that has two wings, an upper and lower wing. Obviously, the First World War accelerated airplane development and brought us to the 1920s, 30s traditional biplane design, which we see embodied in the Lincoln Sport with the two wings, one single engine, single propeller, and undercarriage. And the controls are now centered around a joystick, where before they were a control wheel on the Silver Dart.
Mark, can you tell us a little bit about how the First World War led to the evolution of the cockpit and its enclosing?
Well, what we're seeing embodied in this particular aircraft are creating a more enclosed cabin for the pilot. The need to create an environment where a pilot is not exposed. Obviously, in World War I, they initially started very exposed, and by the end of it, they'd sort of enclosed them into a cockpit surrounding, which we see here. The design changes obviously embodied the ability of the aircraft to fly better. We've now realized that two wings are the way to go at this point. The use of elevators, ailerons, your rudder control, these are all being centered around a stick and a pair of rudder pedals in the cockpit. Instruments are now being provided that will actually provide you with a sense of how fast you're going, how high you're going, and also what your engine's doing up front. Again, we're still using wood. The engine is now air-cooled. But again, the control stick has evolved too. So there's a stick in the cockpit that is basically still controlling the incidence of the wing at the back. So it's changing all those things. We also see design changes too. Like on this particular biplane, it's actually a Lincoln Sport. You could actually buy the plans and build it in your basement, or you could build it wherever you wanted to build it at home.
The Lincoln Sport biplane is a small biplane that was actually built to a set of plans that Lincoln provided to would-be home builders so they could build these aircraft in their homes, or they could actually fabricate them themselves.
So it would have been quite an undertaking putting something like this together.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, there's a lot to it. It's not necessarily a small endeavor, but it's bringing them to the average person that they can actually go out and build your own plane and fly it and crash it and do whatever you want with it. So,
And I'm sure some of those crashes did happen.
absolutely. There's a lot of cases, some were built and they were never flown because once they realized that maybe it was a bit more risky to fly it, they didn't necessarily do it. And this is the case, I think, with this particular aircraft. It was built, but it was never flown, so.
Knowing it's possible to get one of these kits, Mark, I was wondering how the idea of my getting one and giving it a go lands with you.
Well, you have to make sure that you had good construction skills and you had some ability to fly it at the end of the day. Sure, everything's possible.
When we return, I'll hear the story of an antique British revolver that was given to the Army Museum by a school teacher who acquired it in the Khyber Pass. The Adams revolver of the 1850s would have been issued to a British officer. Interestingly, the Army Museum has one that was passed down through generations of Pashtun tribesmen in the Khyber Pass of Pakistan, before a Canadian schoolteacher stumbled on it at a bazaar in the 1980s. I'll join Kevin Robbins for the story. Kevin, I understand you have a Adams revolver that came from the Khyber Pass for me to take a look at today.
Yes, we've got it set up just inside here on the photo tape.
Perfect. So this is a military issue revolver, Kevin.
Yes, so this is a 36 caliber cap and ball percussion revolver, double action, which makes the Adams revolver quite attractive to serving officers in different places. Yes, this revolver would have been made in England. So this again, the trigger guard's missing. The rod here has been sort of altered and just replaced with a piece of metal. But again, this still works. You can see it's a double action. This is a double action, so you don't have to cock the hammer and then fire. You can pull the trigger and that hammer is going to come down the cylinder that contains the cartridges. So this is a dramatic improvement or advantage over the Colt. And again, you'll see this as a prevalent and then standard issued for 30 years, up until 1880 when it's replaced by the Webley.
Kevin, this gun has obviously had quite a life. It made its way from London, where it would have been made, to the Khyber Pass, and now here to the museum. How did it come to be here?
This revolver was donated to the museum by a school teacher from Calgary, Alberta. So he was in the Khyber Pass with his family, and they drifted into one of the many gun stalls or bazaars that were there. The owner of the store tried very hard to sell him something, and he started off, he asked if he went to buy Kalashnikov. And he said, no, I have to go on an airplane, I can't take anything like that with me. So as they were leaving, this gentleman kind of followed them out, and he said, wait. He goes, I have something I think that will interest you. He has an enormous table. It's almost like the bargain bin. So there's all these, different periods of different types of weapons and different kinds of states of repair and disrepair. So this gentleman put his hand deep into the center of the pile. He pulled this revolver out of the bottom of this pile. As soon as he took it out, our school teacher from Calgary, he realized this is a 19th century Victorian revolver, a British revolver. That's a British revolver. And he goes, yes, it is. He goes, and this once belonged to a British officer, and it had been brought in just in the past few weeks and had been traded to get a sort of more modern weapon by a very old gentleman who was a member of one of the hill tribes in that district. And he made a point of saying this was handed down in his family. One of his sort of ancestors had taken this from a British officer in the Khyber Pass.
Wow.
The Khyber Pass is literally a 33-mile passageway through the mountains that lead from what was Afghanistan into what was northern India, which is now Pakistan, okay? So it goes back for thousands of years as a trade route. Alexander the Great would have seen the Khyber Pass, as they call it in the time of the British Empire. The big game, as it's known, is the sort of checkerboard aspect of military strategy mixed with diplomacy, with garrisons along the Khyber Pass. The British want to always be able to control the pass because they're always worried about incursions either from Afghanistan into what was, again, India, with their interests there. It's a potential place where Russia could invade into what was then India in the time of the British Raj. So it's an enormously strategic place for literally thousands of years. And this thing had been passed down for over a century by that time. He was literally wearing it. So this is, a war trophy in a sense. And when you walk around with that in the mountains, everyone would know that that's a British revolver. So this belonged to a British officer who was killed in the Khyber Pass.
Kevin, how do we know that this is a military issue revolver?
Well, the Adams and Dean Company get the contract, actually, to supply the cavalry for the British East India Company. And these are the people, in a lot of cases, that will literally be supplying arms for the forces that are in the Khyber. And the Adams revolver is a standard issue with several variants from about 1854 to 1880, when it's finally replaced by one of the early Webley service revolvers. So this, at its time, this is considered quite a handgun, handy thing to have at close quarters. So again, this is a 36, and by 1855, Beaumont Adams revolver is a 44 caliber, which is a considerable upgrade in lead and sort of impact.
Right. Kevin, we obviously have quite a clear picture as to the general history of the Adams revolver itself, where it would have been used, etc. Is there anything we know about this specific firearm and who it may have belonged to?
Well, in the past 20 years, especially with the internet and Google and whatnot, there are a lot of different specialized websites where you can access the records and sometimes match the serial number of a weapon or a sword and who potentially was issued to. This has a serial number on it. It's not impossible that we might be able to find out when it was issued and when it went over, make the story a little tighter. Was that perhaps like a private purchase by a British officer who went over? Again, because given its dating, this would be, for a young officer in the field, this would be a very handy weapon. Whoever carried this weapon came to a cold, hard end in the Afghan region of the pass and on the plains. Yeah.
Kevin, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to see this gun, as it's not on display. It's been a privilege to see it and to hear the story behind it, and to sort of go back and imagine those days in the Khyber Pass. They must have been some pretty rough time for those British officers who would have been accustomed to a very different way of life, that's for sure.
Yeah. So it's had a long journey, and again, this is why the teacher from Calgary, he thought this was a good place for it to come to rest, was at an old British fort.
Right.
So, all right. Well, thanks for coming.
My pleasure. Having special access to go beyond museum exhibits reveals some of history's best kept secrets and most interesting stories. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of military artifacts on another episode of Militaria at the museum.